All right. Welcome to Leftist Read-Along. Let me make sure the audio is good here. Let me right here. Let's see. Test, 1, 2. All right. Everything sounds good. We're just going to get right to it today. As you are well aware by the description, this is an ad-free Leftist Read-Along for journaling and analysis of leftist current events. Feel free to follow along at the websites provided in the description link. And we're going to get going today. First article here is a video of 10 years of the movement for Black Lives, lessons from the heat of the struggle, PSL Roundtable. I'm not going to play the video for you here, but I'm just going to make sure you guys are aware of it. This was released on February 26th. It's a video released by PSL. 10 years of a movement for Black Lives, lessons from the heat of the struggle. As you can see by the image, there's some speakers. Claudia de la Cruz is there. She's probably giving her well-informed analysis on the 10-year anniversary. Read his. This here says, this year marks 10 years since the uprising in Ferguson in response to the murder of Mike Brown by police officer Darren Wilson. The Ferguson uprising ignited a resurgence in the modern-day movement for Black liberation, paving the way for a future anti-racist mass movement. 3 organizers with the Party of Socialism and Liberation who have been involved in the Black liberation struggle since Ferguson, including presidential candidate Claudia de la Cruz, reflect on the shifting character of the movement over the last decade and lessons to bring forward with us in the fight. If you're an activist or if you're getting your feet wet, I definitely recommend listening to Claudia. She is a wealth of knowledge to see how people can get involved in the movement for Black liberation as well as equality and justice in the United States and around the world. The working class struggle as a proletariat or socialist or communist, we consider the working class struggle a worldwide struggle where we don't believe anyone is free in anywhere if everyone isn't free. All right, so let me backtrack here, get going on the next article. Let's see. The latest article here from February 27th, Democrats back anti-immigration policies in attempt to secure funding for U.S. imperialism. Right, written by Alex Hu. The photo is of a Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, credit by Flickr. At the beginning of this month, Senate Republicans blocked a bill that contained some of the most stringent anti-immigration border restrictions Congress has considered in decades. The bill would have provided over $28 billion dedicated to border security and immigration enforcement agencies like U.S. Customs and Border Control and ICE. It would have created a border shutdown measure, expanded immigrant detention facilities, and made it more difficult for migrants to apply for asylum. Republican senators blocked the bill because they argue that it did not go far enough. But what is more disturbing is the eagerness for President Biden and Democrats to negotiate and agree to those staunchly anti-immigrant policies. Since the Democrats had branded themselves as a pro-immigrant party, especially during Biden's presidential run against Trump in 2020, their willingness to agree and endorse this border bill reflect a right-wing turn that shocked and confused pro-immigrant Democrats and progressives. But despite any professed outward ideological differences, this turn renewed Republicans and Democrats' shared commitment to at least a couple of things: U.S.-funded wars abroad and funneling taxpayer money into profit for weapons manufacturers. Republicans and Democrats united in desire for military spending. For an explanation for this right-wing shift, we need not look any further than the strong desire for Biden and Democrats to fuel U.S. imperialist projects overseas, which was the original focus and other components of the blocked bill. Biden and Democrats leaders like Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer lambasted Republicans for not only for turning down their compromise on immigration, but also preventing Congress from sending roughly $80 billion of military support to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. It is telling that Democrats are perfectly willing to sacrifice their professed dedication to immigrants in order to perpetuate a genocide in Palestine, a proxy war against Russia, and military aggression against China. Ultimately, Biden and the Democrats got what they wanted a week later when Schumer resorted to Plan B for funding imperialism, and the Senate passed a standalone foreign military plan to spend an astounding total of $96 billion on Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. Biden and Schumer exhorted senators to approve the bill and celebrated its passage as crucial to protecting U.S. national security and Western democracy globally. The vote passed by a wide margin, which reflects the reality that at the end of the day, both Democrats and Republicans march in lockstep when it comes to U.S. military expansionism. Some political commentators surmise that Democrats negotiated and agreed to the hardline border deal as a shrewd political maneuver to paint Republicans as unreasonable hypocrites when they rejected their own immigration demands. But this theory fails to explain Biden's drive to continue enacting the border measures from the failed bill even after Senate approval of the foreign military spending that he and Democrats championed. Biden is now considering resorting to his executive action powers to crack down on the border and prevent people entering the country from claiming asylum. This plan disturbingly resembles the action that Trump tried to take in 2018, which was criticized by Democrats back then and ultimately blocked by the federal courts. With the impending presidential election this year, Biden is setting himself up to face off against Trump and appeal to voters by showing that he can be just as tough on immigration and the border. Democrat mayors and governors across the country, including those in New York, Illinois, and Colorado, are now also part of the call from within Biden's party, pressuring him to act on immigration. Instead of standing in contrast to Trump's racist xenophobia, as he and Democrats had promised, they have made a drastic right-wing about-face and are now even considering recycling Trump's unlawful measures. Money for words, but can't feed the poor. Working-class Americans should see through the political theater going on in the U.S. government and understand funneling the originally proposed $118 billion of their tax dollars to anti-immigration immigrant measures domestically and deadly wars abroad are both against their interest and deserves to be completely rejected. Although Democrats and Republicans will bicker and clash over the details of their agenda, their dealings reflect mutual desires to channel resources into border control and the military-industrial complex. Neither of these systems create anything productive and constructive to society and only perpetuate violence, destruction, and suffering. It is disgraceful that the U.S. government has unfathomable amounts of money to dedicate to these priorities instead of supporting the people who live in the country, citizens and non-citizens alike, by funding the housing, healthcare, education, infrastructure, and social services that everyone needs to survive. This is the latest example showing that the working class cannot trust and rely on the Democratic Party to fight for our interests. Though the original border security bill failed to pass, the Democrats' willingness to back it is just the latest in the pattern of throwing the most marginalized under the bus for political gain, whether it's migrants, women, and trans people. This shows the imperative of building an independent people's movement to protect our fundamental rights. Because of when it comes to keeping the engines of the American empire and the war machine running, everything is on the table to negotiate with Democrats. All right, so my opinion on this issue is that it's all for profit. All this military spending on the border and overseas, it's really just aid packages that are created to funnel more money into the industrial military complex so that people invested in that sector could get richer, especially their CEOs. It's really a huge reflection of the failures of capitalism to understand that capitalism doesn't work without a military system to keep it fueled, a for-profit military system. Um, and trust me, no matter how much money you spend on the border, people are still going to come, and corporations in America are still going to hire immigrants. Uh, it's the ratchet effect where they keep offering you worse candidates every year and tell you you have to pick the least worst, and then the next 4 years they're just going to do it again and give you even worse. You might think, how can it get any worse? It can get a lot worse. Don't forget that we're the richest nation on earth, and people have it a lot worse in other nations. Um, yeah, so when it comes to immigrant funding and the immigration borders, they're not really going to make much changes. People are still going to come, and you can't deport over 10 million people, no matter how much you think you can. It's not sustainable. It's not affordable. It's not a business that most corporations are going to support because they need the cheap labor to keep the grift going, the capitalist grift going. So what will happen in a few years? They'll crack down on the border. People will still come in, and eventually, because they'll want all the people that are here uh, registered correctly and legally, they'll provide some kind of amnesty. Um, and it doesn't matter if it's the Republicans or the Democrats. It just really depends on the economic situation in America. Uh, don't forget that it was Ronald Reagan that provided amnesty for undocumented immigrants back in the late 80s. And then it's been the Democrats that have been hard on immigration, and Obama was the deporter in chief. He really set the tone for ramping up deportations, and Trump just followed along. And now Biden is placating to the right, and he's following along too because it's in the playbook. This is exactly what they do. They present you two bad options, tell you to pick the least worst, but either way, the corporations, the elitists, and the oligarchs get what they want out of it, and you get the uh, belief that you live in a democracy when you don't. It is all calculated so that you feel like you have a choice, but you don't. Not when you're picking between two very horrible candidates that don't represent you and electing people into office that are elitists that don't represent you. So stop idolizing these rich people that think they know what they're talking about, that don't represent you. Start electing working class people that actually want to give you social programs to support you and your families, and realize that they likely won't win, but at least you're giving them the power to organize and mobilize more working class people. Historically, it has always been the working class movements like strikes, labor unions that have always mobilized for rights and put pressure on government. It doesn't matter what party you're in. The parties are a sham. They're a fallacy. They are the curtains to the magician in the background. So just my suggestion, look into independents that are actually about organizing, like Claudia de la Cruz or Jill Stein. I think I prefer Claudia de la Cruz, but because she is a working class person that is very knowledgeable and is experienced in boots on the ground, organizing and mobilizing. All right, let's see here. Time to go to the next article. What's going on here? All right, Democrats back anti-immigration laws. All right, March 1st. Let's see here. Santa Ana, California to vote on expanding voter access to non-citizens in 2024 elections. Let's see what this is about. This is interesting. Written by Jana Pante, February 29th, 2024, 4-minute read. All right. In November last year, the California City of Santa Ana City Council passed a resolution to include a non-citizen voting measure in the 2024 elections, which will determine whether non-citizens in Santa Ana will have the right to vote in municipal elections. If passed, this measure would set a new precedent in the expansion of voting rights for a group that has been historically prevented from voting. Santa Ana is a majority Latino city in the heart of Orange County, with 30% of Santa Ana residents being non-citizens. The city has spearheaded rent control, immigrant protection, and police accountability measures in a county that is notorious for reactionary politics, initiatives propelled by grassroots efforts. And now voters can determine if many more of their community members will have a say in citywide elections. Powered by Santa Ana Families for Fair Elections, the Non-Citizen Voting Act represents one of the many struggles immigrants and undocumented residents face while living in the United States. Non-residents serve as a pillar to the country, but are also non-citizens serve as a pillar to the country, but are also one of the most exploited groups in the U.S., always deprived of the ability to vote during elections. Fung, an undocumented single mother who immigrated from Vietnam, said in a public comment to the Santa Ana City Council that she had contributed years of work, taxes, and support to the city but receives nothing in return. Her translator, Vincent Tran, also noted that she does not own a car and relies on public transit, which she helps pay for, but does not have any say or due to her inability to vote or legislation that may influence it. Santa Ana particularly prides itself on its Latin American roots, built on immigration. It is also Orange County's first and only sanctuary city. Mayor Valerie Amezcua just last year signed an agreement with the mayor of Sahuayo, Mexico, establishing Santa Ana and Sahuayo as sister cities. The Santa Ana City website proudly states that Santa Ana has a large population of immigrants and residents with roots in Sahuayo. Despite this, many immigrant members of the community feel completely unheard by the city council, who use their heritage as a selling point. Amezcua has frequently opposed progressive legislation, including the Non-Citizen Voting Act, which would give a voice to the very constituents she claims to uphold. Araceli Robles, a dedicated promotora with Latino health access, which with years of experience fighting for renters' rights, stated in a public comment at the November 7, 2023 meeting that she had been excited at the prospect of Santa Ana's first woman mayor, but it was clear to her now that Amezcua was not advocating for the people. And because of Robles' non-citizen status, she cannot currently participate in the election for mayor. The non-citizens of Santa Ana are completely excluded from participating in decisions that greatly impact their livelihood. Currently, the Santa Ana mayor and Santa Ana City Council members are elected by excluding almost one-third of the voting age population in the city. Carlos Perea, longtime organizer, community member, and a non-citizen himself, told Liberation, "That's undemocratic. We live in supposedly the most democratic nation in the world, but many communities, whether it's indigenous, Black, or immigrants, we continue to fight for very basic things, like the fight to have representation." Tracy Law, director of Viet Rise and an immigrant rights activist, stated that if not non-citizen voting passes, Santa Ana's political landscape would change drastically. Santa Ana has been the home base, the heart of some of the most progressive movements that have come out of the county, and a lot of the people who led those movements were undocumented. I think the city council is going to completely change, Lass said. We think another world is possible. Non-citizen voting would give a lot of hope, not just to the city, but to the country, to the county, and to the whole country. Gema Suarez, an organizer with their Centro de Cultural de Mexico, described, "I think Santa Ana would be a sanctuary city for all immigrants and also indigenous people to have been called foreign in their own land." Another member of El Centro de Cultural de Mexico, Silvia Vendano, told Liberation, "The plutocracy will fall. We will tear that wall down. It will lead towards real democracy for the people." This ballot measure also follows a generous recall attempt of Ward 3 Council member Jesse Lopez, who voted in favor of working class interests like instituting rent control and refusing to bow to police union and landlord organizations' coercive demands. Mesqua and Council Member Phil Becerra, who have received substantial donations from the police union and landlords, endorsed this recall. There are also 2 of the 3 council members who voted against putting non-citizen voting on the ballot. However, should the ballot measure pass in November, it can minimize the reactionary values and influence of the Santa Ana Police Union that Mesqua and Becerra represent. Residents like Fung, Robles, and Parea, who tirelessly work to better the community they love, would be on equal standing with their citizen counterparts. Issues that Santa Ana currently faces, which disproportionately impact working-class immigrant communities, such as unaffordable housing, lack of reliable public transit systems, excessive spending on police, corrupt public officials, these may finally be addressed in a way that actually benefits the community. The problem in Santa Ana are the same problems faced by every city in the U.S. It is clear from conversations with residents and public comments made over the course of several council meetings that non-citizens want affordable housing, healthcare, equal rights, things that every person should have access to, and that they are willing to fight for it. In the event the act passes, Santa Ana would set a historic precedent and could inspire similar fights across the nation. All right. So my thoughts on this is you may be a non-citizen, but you're still paying taxes. You're still part of the community. Yeah, you should be allowed to vote on the community that you live in. Yeah, that's our stance with as socialist, communist, Marxist, Leninist supporters of true democracy. Anyone that is contributes to the economy in that neighborhood, in that community, should have a right to speak up and should have their votes counted. Not much else I can say about that. I'm not well versed with Santa Ana. Don't know exactly everything about it or how it's going down. But yeah, I guess we'll see, and time will tell what the people of Santa Ana decide. All right. So here's a short one. On March 2nd, the world would march to stop Israel's genocidal assault on Rafah. Article by Lion Fuleihan, March 1st, 2022. 4 minutes. All right. So this is based on the marches that happened yesterday. Photo aerial shot of January 13 National March for Gaza. Credit Adrian Antonioli. All right. This article was produced by Globetrotter. All right. So here we go. For the past 5 months, in every part of the globe, millions of people have participated in protest actions. They have been part of one of the largest social movements in living memory, in support of the Palestinian people and against the U.S.-Israeli genocide in Gaza. Now, Israel is threatening to carry out the worst massacre yet, a full-scale invasion of Rafah, starting March 10th. In response, this solidarity movement is preparing to mobilize in huge numbers in a global day of action on March 2nd. Supporters of the Palestinian cause have long argued that Israel's occupation of Palestine and its 17-year land, air, and sea blockade of Gaza have turned the enclave into an open-air prison. Over 2 million Gazans are packed into a tiny area closed off to the outside world. As the Israel military rampaged through the 4 other governorates of Gaza, 1.5 million Palestinians were driven into Rafah, making the open-air prison even tinier. This is an area half the size of San Francisco. It is now twice as densely populated as New York City. There's nowhere to hide and nowhere left to flee as the U.S.-supplied Israeli Air Force bombards Rafah in preparation for a catastrophic ground offensive. With 70% of the residential housing in Gaza destroyed and 576,000 Gazans facing outright famine, Israel's mandatory evacuation orders are nothing more than an empty gesture. Israeli officials know well that the over 1 million displaced Gazans are not in a physical condition to flee once again. For the past 5 months, Israel has massacred Palestinians with bullets, missiles, and bombs, and now are escalating the use of another weapon, hunger. According to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency of Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, the 500,000 Palestinians remaining in northern Gaza now face starvation. The UN agency also reported that there have been no aid deliveries to the north of Gaza since January 23rd. Along the border between Rafah and Egypt, Israel routinely halts all but a few token aid shipments. Meanwhile, its soldiers have facilitated protests by far-right activists against aid delivery along the border, giving the authorities cover to deny entry to trucks carrying vital supplies. A new study by scholar at Johns Hopkins University at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine gives us a horrific preview of what the consequences of an invasion of Rafah under these dire circumstances would look like. Researchers found that up to 86,000 Palestinians would die in the onslaught over the course of 6 months. Many of these would be so-called excess deaths, people dying of starvation, preventable disease, and other causes present only because of war. Fearing the unprecedented global outrage that would come with an all-out Rafah invasion, some politicians like EU Foreign Affairs head Joseph Borrell have felt compelled to state their opposition. This is an important crack in the alliance between Western powers and Israel. If Israel instead becomes mainly a liability that damages U.S. standing in the world by virtue of its extreme abuses, then it could be abandoned by its sponsor, just like the South African apartheid regime was in the end of the 1980s. However, the true will of these politicians to protect Palestinians in Rafah should also be questioned. Joe Biden, for example, says that he would only support an invasion if there were a credible plan to protect civilians. One must ask how civilian life could ever be protected when bombing an area with 600,000 people per square mile, with 60,000 people per square mile, hundreds of thousands of whom have only the cloth of a tent to shield them. The only way to protect Palestinian civilians would be to demand Israel end its assault on Gaza and cut off military aid. This financial support totaled USD 3.8 billion a year from the United States and has only increased during these months of escalated genocide. Instead, Biden and the politicians in Congress are trying to send an additional 14 billion more to Israel. Far from dissuading Israel, the U.S. wants to send money so that Israel can take its war even further. Negotiations without negotiating. Even though the Israeli forces have been unable to defeat the Palestinian resistance after over 4 months of full-scale assault, the Netanyahu government is already hatching schemes to impose a permanently military dictatorship of the occupied Gaza territory. On February 23rd, Netanyahu presented a plan that envisions total Israeli control of Gaza indefinitely with the help of unnamed local officials. The Israeli military would have total freedom of movement throughout Gaza to terrorize Palestinians at will. The Biden administration counter-proposal to install a version of the deeply unpopular Palestinian Authority in Gaza is still a total negation of Palestine's right to self-determination. Israeli officials, including members of far-right parties serving in Netanyahu's cabinet, have openly articulated their dream of the mass expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza and their replacement by Jewish-only settlements. A conference held in December attended by 11 members of the Israeli cabinet and 15 members of parliament even went so far as to propose a map of where 21 of these settlements would be located. Meanwhile, in the latest round of negotiations, Israel has still refused to meet any of the demands of the Palestinian resistance groups. The latest proposal sent to Hamas outlines a plan for a temporary and partial pause that provides no framework for permanent ceasefire and maintains Israeli control over large parts of the territory, non-starters in a serious talks. In this context, Biden promises of a ceasefire by next Monday appears to be an attempt to increase pressure on Hamas to accept the obviously unacceptable proposal and evade condemnation from his own constituents. The U.S.-Israeli position has never experienced a defeat in the arena of public opinion as it is experiencing now, and the pressure of mass mobilization has been a major factor in this defeat. As the threat of a full-scale invasion of Rafah grows closer, it is clear to activists that this is a moment where mobilization can have an even more critical impact, and pressure on the defenders of genocide can prevent this nightmare from becoming a reality. The Palestinian people have displayed the most courageous resistance and determination in the face of brutal U.S.-Israeli genocidal assault. Generations after generation, Palestinians have kept up the fight to return to their homeland. Now the people of the world stand with them like never before. The March 2nd global demonstrations will be a powerful expression of this sentiment. Hayam Fulelia is a popular educator and organizer. She is the education director of the People's Forum and an editor of 1804 books in New York City. 1,804 books in New York City. Yeah, so we've touched base on this before. It's clearly a genocide. It's clearly funded by Joe Biden. So there is no shame in calling him Genocide Joe. That's what he is. He's a genocidal maniac funding genocide. I personally will not be voting for him at all. So I have no issue, no quarrel with trying to convince people not to vote with him at all as well. We need to elect people that are actually going to fight for human rights. They're actually going to fight for all human rights around the world, and are empathetic to the human plight. People might say, well, then you're going to get Trump. What's the difference? You already have the worst person available in office, practically committing genocide, a total war criminal in Ghoul, and the Democratic Party is going along with it. People in Congress have approved billions of dollars to be sent to Israel and Ukraine, and I believe also Taiwan. So they do not care about Americans. They care about the bottom dollar of the military-industrial complex, making more money just to keep up the economy, which means just to keep the 1% happy, because keeping the economy going does not mean that the working class people are making living wages and living good lives. Their lives are slowly degrading. Health insurance is getting higher, rent is getting higher. Why? Because they allow it. Our government allows it, and it just shows that they're clear puppets, clear sock puppets of the actual oligarchy, of the actual enterprises and corporations that are the true overlords or landlords of the country. I will keep saying free Palestine. I will keep saying Zionism is fascism. I will keep saying Genocide Joe. I will keep saying ceasefire now. I will keep saying that it is not anti-Semitic to say Zionism is fascism, because I am not talking about Jewish people. I am talking about Zionism. I have full respect for Jewish people, along with the other 3,000 religions around the world, as long as they let other people live. But when you become an ethno-state like Israel, you become a fascist state, and you become a tentacle of the imperialist West Arm. So, yeah. And there's plenty of Jewish people out there and activists that agree with what I'm saying, that are totally aware that this is a fascist genocide, and it should end as soon as possible. My hope is that it does end, even by force if it has to. We should have people stand up around the world to defend the innocent, to defend the weakest among us, against tyrannical forces like Israel and their funders like Western Europe and the imperialist branch, Western imperialism. Okay. What's going on here? Let's see if we have any more articles to squeeze in for today. So that was that. Democrats, black anti-immigration policies attempt to secure funding for. Okay. Then there's March 2nd. I think this one here I haven't read. Let's see here. Last one for today. And look at that, it came out today. This article is titled "Palestine: The Struggle for for national liberation. Palestine, the struggle for national liberation and the role of the U.S. working class. Photo, demonstrators in the West Bank wave Palestinian flags, credit Pixabay Hosni Salah. All right, it's a pretty cool picture. I like it. So yeah, I'll take my time reading this one. I believe this one's more of a guide as to what we can do as working class people to support the Palestinian struggle, which is the struggle of all people around the world for freedom and liberation. And here we go. As Israel's war, excuse me, let me take a sip of this before I continue. All right. As Israel's war on the people of Gaza approaches its 5th month, it is clear to the majority of people in the world that Israel's actions constitute collective punishment and genocide against the people of Gaza, clear crimes under international law. However, it is important to recognize that the oppression of Palestinians as an entire people is and always has been the central features of Israel's existence. We can call this reality, the oppression of a whole people based on their nationality. National oppression. By viewing Palestine in this way, we can better understand the political dynamics of the struggle within Palestine and to gain more clarity on the role that the solidarity movement in the United States must play. National oppression and Palestine. We should not view the struggle for Palestine or any issue we care about within a vacuum. Rather, we should understand that the political reality in Palestine through a global and historical context. In many ways, Israel's brutality in Gaza has been uniquely horrifying, but the colonial relationship between Israel and Palestine is not unique. Throughout the world, entire nations of people have faced national oppression. In some cases, national oppression manifests within the borders of a single country. Think of the long-standing oppression of Black and Native peoples within the United States. In other cases of national oppression, a colonial power will take complete control over a colony while still treating the colony as a separate entity than the colonizing country. This is the primary form that national oppression took throughout the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and Latin America during the era of colonialism. Palestine is a mix of both dynamics because the 1.6 million Palestinians who live within the borders of Israel, despite holding Israeli citizenship, are systemically oppressed by the Zionist regime, as are those Palestinians living in the occupied territories of the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and East Jerusalem. The former face institutionalized discrimination and exclusion as Israel denies them equal nationality and status, while Palestinians in the occupied territories are subject to land theft, house demolitions, restrictions of movement, mass arrests, and severe repression for political dissent, among other things. In the case of Gaza, even before October 7th, Palestinians have been subject to a suffocating 16-year siege that destroyed their economy, along with indiscriminate bombing campaigns every few years at the hands of their Israeli occupiers. The struggle for national liberation. In his prolific book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, Guyanese Marxist Walter Rodney explains how national oppression removes a people from their process of historical development. The removal from history follows logically from the loss of power which colonialism represented. The power to act independently is the guarantee to participate actively and consciously in history. To be colonized is to be removed from history, except in the most passive sense. We can see this clearly in the case of Palestine. It is impossible for Palestinians to fully grapple the question of social and economic development while under the boot of Israeli oppression. How can Palestinians make an infrastructure plan when their schools, houses, and hospitals are at constant threat of being bombed or otherwise destroyed? How can they invest in social and cultural development when every day is a struggle for survival? How can they fully engage in politics when their day-to-day movement and fundamental rights are so thoroughly restricted by Israeli apartheid? How can they even begin the process of development when Israel controls, whether directly or indirectly, nearly every aspect of the Palestinian economy. Palestinians will only be able to fully engage with these questions and reassert their ability to forge their own history after overturning their reality of national oppression, which we call this process national liberation. Within national liberation movements, there are inevitably different ideological tendencies and organizations because no group of people is a monolith. But despite differences that exist in the movement, there's a fundamental understanding that the primary enemy is the oppressor, and that political differences between various groups in the national liberation movement can only truly be settled after national liberation is won. Despite the corporate media's shameless attempts to frame Israel's current genocide as the Israel-Hamas war, Israel is truly engaged in a struggle against the entire Palestinian national liberation movement. After October 7th, all of the major political organizations in Palestine not only expressed support for the actions taken by the Palestinian resistance on that day, but also called for an expansion of the struggle against Israel's oppression. A poll conducted in December revealed that almost 3 in 4 Palestinians supported Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Again, these groups and individuals have a wide range of ideological and strategic perspectives, but they are united under the banner of a national liberation movement. The role of the U.S. movement. The U.S. government is a central force in maintaining the oppression in Palestinians due to its unconditional military, political, and diplomatic support for Israel. This gives the Palestine Solidarity Movement in the United States a particular responsibility. The role of the movement in the United States is not to critique the ideology or strategy of the Palestinians' liberation movement, but rather to do our part to support Palestinians in overthrowing the yoke of colonialism so that they can decide for themselves how they wish to organize their society. The process of Palestinians reorganizing their society will likely include intense political struggles within Palestine, just as we have seen similar struggles within other countries that liberated themselves from national oppression. Again, it is not the role of the U.S. movement to try to direct the outcome of those struggles, only to support the Palestinians' right to self-determination, in other words, their right to reclaim their process of independent historical development and collectively shape their future. This is not only a morally correct position for the U.S. movement, but a strategic necessity. The capitalist class that supports and profits from the oppression of Palestinians is the same capitalist class that creates poverty, inequality, and insecurity within the United States. Thus, if those capitalists lose their domination over Palestine, the working class movement here will benefit. So too would the Palestinian liberation struggle benefit if those capitalists lose their domination over the U.S. working class. International solidarity is a necessary tool to build a strong working class movement on many fronts against a common enemy. But genuine internationalism can only be forged on the basis of mutual respect between workers of different nations. If workers who live within imperialist countries try to dictate what workers of oppressed nations should do or believe, it undermines the respect. This is a crucial concept for U.S. workers in particular to grasp. The U.S. government positions itself as a policeman of the world, and U.S. workers are inundated with propaganda designed to make us believe that it is our right and duty to intervene in the affairs of oppressed nations, a way of thinking that only serves the interests of U.S. imperialism and harms our movement. But the cracks are showing. As the last 5 months of mass mobilizations and most recently, the stunning sacrifice made by U.S. Air Force service member Aaron Bushnell have demonstrated, Zionist propaganda and the unwavering U.S. movement support for Israel are wearing thin. The world is seeing Israel for the terrorist regime that it is, and it is up to the working class build a movement in the United States capable of channeling that anger toward ending our government's support and military aid to propping up the Zionist state. The tide is turning, and the days of both Israel's settler colonialist project and U.S. imperialism are numbered. As I mentioned earlier, This is a thing where liberation is of empires and capitalism it's a global movement. It's a movement for working class unity across the world, around the world, for all working class, to understand that the 3,000 billionaires that rule this planet are just 3,000 people, and they should not have all the wealth. They should not control the whole planet, and they should not hoard all the wealth and resources when there's so many people that are dying of starvation and neglect. What was the point of all our human advancement and all our resources created uh, throughout the centuries, if not to make all humanity better, stronger, and progress uh, fairly uh, and productively? Yeah, this is total moral bankruptcy. What we're seeing happening in uh, in geopolitics right now in the world. Uh, to see so much wealth, to see so much accumulation of wealth, so many resources, so much advanced technology, only to be used for the elites. While, for example, here in America, more than 60,000 Americans died due to lack of healthcare, not because the meds don't exist, but because they are denied the service because they don't have healthcare. We have children that are dying here that are undereducated, not because there isn't enough resources for education, but because our education system here is based on budgeting, based on how much income tax and revenue is collected from the local communities. So you have cities like Beverly Hills with the best schools, and then you have poor cities where kids are going to broken down schools with very little resources, very little support. So it just creates a bigger uphill battle for them, you know. Uh, the same with the working class here. Inflation has skyrocketed so much nowadays. The minimum wage hasn't been raised since like 2007. It's still at like 7.25 an hour. But even the prices of cars have doubled since then. Rents have doubled since then, and minimum wage has not. That is ridiculous. Uh, I think it was Brie on Bad Faith that mentioned, or in a Hill that mentioned that three elitists in America own half of the wealth, uh, 50% of the wealth in America. That's disgusting. Um, And how do they do it? Well, they do it through these military contracts where they send aid. Then the aid is used to buy military weapons here, and they get rich off of it. And that's how they manipulate and run the world, right? Um, yeah. So the working class struggle is a united struggle where we have to not worry about dictating how Palestine should evolve and determine their setup, but a working class struggle to give Palestine the ability to decide, so that they are liberated from oppressors, colonialists like Israel and Western imperialism. Cool. Well, that seems like all the articles for today. It's a good read. I got a lot out of it. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to keep it short today. We're almost at an hour. Uh, Feel free to watch this and share this if you ever like. If not, I do this weekly just for studying purposes, to progress as a leftist, as a stoic leftist for myself personally. If people join along, eventually, hopefully, we can have chats and have guests and have deeper conversations and answer questions in regards to this. Everybody have a great night and enjoy the rest of your weekend.